get into the Q&A, because we have a little bit more time, because Suzanne mentioned that lunch is going to be at 12 instead of 11:45. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about the film before we get into the Q&A. So first, I should mention, if in the middle of the Q&A, if I put these on, this is for my sensory issues. So I'm not like trying to be antisocial and like, you know, it's for delay. So obviously my film's about Asperger's, but Asperger syndrome is actually no longer in the DSM-5, but my film was produced when it still was. So, and when I got diagnosed, what that was when it was in the DSM. So like my diagnosis is still Asperger's unless I were to get re-diagnosed, which then I would have autism spectrum disorder, since that's what it has been merged with in the DSM-5. So also my perspective on Asperger's and autism has sort of changed over time. So some of the language in the film, like nowadays I wouldn't use, like for instance, like coping with Asperger's, or saying that like depression comes from Asperger's. Like I would probably word it a little bit differently nowadays. It's more coping with the world, and that it's usually just our incompatibility with the world that causes a lot of our mental health problems and a lot of our struggles. So this film began as a short video project for a class that I was taking in college. And the goal of this project was to tell a story. And so I decided, why don't I tell a story about Asperger's? And I didn't want it to be about me. I had a friend with Asperger's, Katie, and she was the first person that I interviewed. And so she was who I talked to about her experiences with Asperger's. And then I published it as a, like sort of a trailer for a non-existent documentary on YouTube. And then I realized this might actually be a good thing to pursue. I should actually make it into a film. And so that's when I met Matt Rhodes, who I met him online through an Asperger's Facebook group. There's tons of them out there. So if you're on Facebook and you want to find other people with Asperger's, or if you have kids who want to find other people, you know, on the autism spectrum, there's tons of Facebook groups out there.
Can you name your favorite ones?
My favorite ones? Yes. It really depends on what kind of group you want. If you want a really big group, there's one that's just called Asperger's, and that one has maybe like over 20,000 members at this point. I would recommend that one if you want a big group. If you want a smaller group, there's one called Adults with Asperger's Syndrome 2, specifically 2. The first one's a giant group. I also have a group on Facebook called Christians with Asperger's. So, you know, if you identify as a Christian and you have Asperger's, that would be another good group. And there's a list of groups linked on my website somewhere, alyssahuberfilms.com, or actually my Facebook page. If you look up Alyssa Huber Films, I have a whole list full of them, so I hope that helps. So yeah, Matt Rhodes I met on a group for people with Asperger's, and so I decided, you know, maybe I should interview him as well. And me and him are actually engaged now. We weren't at the time, but oh, thank you. Yeah, so, you know, now every time I watch it, it's like, oh, it's so cute. So the most difficult thing about producing the film is that I decided to pursue this as a project on top of my schoolwork, and I was still in college, and so I was trying to juggle my schoolwork as well as trying to make this film, and I was pulling all-nighters and I was miserable, but honestly, I love that. I love like being super sleep deprived and being at the computer all day and going absolutely insane for my work, because I love my work. But I did have a lot of anxiety, and I wasn't really happy when it was finally finished, so I could finally sleep and function again. So the best thing I think about producing this film is that, I mean, I already knew this, but I learned even more so that everybody is different, whether you're on the spectrum or not. Nobody fits into a specific mold. It's like, I went into this thinking like, oh, I'm going to teach people about Asperger's and all the criteria and all the things, and I realized, not everybody fits the criteria in the DSM, not everybody fits all of these stereotypes. Even I had kind of an image of my head of what autism was, even though, I'm on the spectrum. And after the film was finished, I became more aware of what's called the neurodiversity movement. And neurodiversity basically means that everybody is different, everyone's brains work differently, we all function differently, and that's normal. And it's more like saying there is no normal. Like, everybody's differences are what is normal, if there was a normal. And so that includes people on the autism spectrum, or people who have ADHD or OCD or bipolar. It's just kind of saying, no matter how your brain works, you're a human being and you just have a natural human variation, whatever that might be. So I'm now open for questions, so if anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Hi, I just want to say how much I appreciate you coming and sharing, and the video was just fantastic. So my son is young, and he was diagnosed at the age of 3 on the autism spectrum, and this was after the DSM-5. But he would be, if it had been before DSM-5, he would have probably been Asperger's diagnosis. And so my question for you is, when you went into college, how was that transition into college, and also what kind of accommodations did you need or ask for, if any?
Honestly, my transition was horrible. That's because my mental health was horrible. It had been horrible since I was a teenager, and I had never really, I honestly just contributed, I kind of just thought my mental health problems were because, I have Asperger's, so I'm just gonna trudge through it and I'll be okay. But I'm getting help for it now, but at the time I was having a lot of mental health issues. So, change is already difficult for me. That's part of my Asperger's. So the transition from living at home, because I lived on campus, so the transition from living at home to living on campus was really hard. That first month, I just honestly, my thought most of the time was just, I want to die, because I couldn't handle that change. Eventually, I did get used to it, but some of the things that helped for that transition. One big thing was that before I actually started going, I had a tour of the dorm rooms. I got to see the inside of the dorm rooms, what they all looked like. I got a tour of the campus, I got to see the classrooms. Basically everywhere where I was supposed to be, I had to look at it so that I had an image in my head ahead of time and I could process it easier when I went into it. And I would honestly recommend that for anybody on the spectrum who has trouble with change in new places. Some other things, I did get some accommodations at school, and I was lucky because my school had, they had basically a building, well, it was more like an office area where it was like a academic and career center, and you'd go there and you would, talk to staff and you'd take tests there, and there were staff there that were specifically there for people with disabilities who they would communicate with professors for you, they would sort of be a middleman and help you communicate what your accommodations are and make sure that you're getting them. And some of the accommodations that I got extended test time, and I got to take a test in a separate room. I got to have half the lights off so that I wouldn't have to wear my sunglasses when I'm taking the test. I got to use a computer instead of handwriting because I have a hard time with handwriting. So instead of writing essays, I would just type in a document. Let's see. My school was they were excellent with those kind of things. There was this one day when my mental health was just really horrible for a few weeks, because this is around the time when I also have OCD, and I was just diagnosed with OCD, and so in light of just being diagnosed, my OCD symptoms flared up even more because I was aware of it. So I had a hard time attending classes, and there's this one professor who allowed me to attend sort of virtually, because it was we would meet for groups, and I would attend through a Google document and just type in the chat, my thoughts on things. So that was super helpful.
Yes, thanks for sharing your film. You did a great job. I liked the way you handled sensory issues, and I was curious as to if you always knew you had sensory issues. Because I know, like for me, for instance, when I was first diagnosed at 17, one of the things I couldn't identify with was sensory issues. But then I've realized over the years that actually I did have sensory issues. Some of them I've grown, some of them I still have, but a lot of them I took for granted. I'm wondering what your experience was, if you always knew you had sensory issues, or if you had to think about and realize, yeah, that actually is a sensory issue.
It's a great question, and I kind of can relate to you on that, because I wasn't aware that I had sensory issues, especially when I was younger. I was diagnosed when I was about 12, and that was because I'd been homeschooled all the way up until middle school, and then I started going to a public school, and the teachers noticed she's got some interesting things about her, you might want to get her tested. And so then I figured out I had Asperger's, but even then I had no idea that the reason why I got headaches in school, or I couldn't pay attention, or I felt overwhelmed. I didn't know that a lot of that was, things like the lights being too bright, or too much noise, or too much socializing. And I don't think I really realized until I was in college, what my issues were. It's oh, it's actually the lights that are making it hard to focus. So that's when I started wearing sunglasses and a visor, and I started having earbuds with me everywhere, and earplugs. But I honestly think that's pretty common for people on the spectrum to not be fully aware of what's going on, especially if they either don't embrace the fact that they're autistic, or they don't really quite comprehend what that means, or that there are sensory issues. And I think, or in some instances, I'm thinking of I know people whose parents would just deny that they're on the spectrum and just say, oh, you're just being lazy, or you're just being defiant, when it could just be the sensory issues. And it's difficult because then they might believe that it's really they're just misbehaving. So sorry, coming off on a tangent there. I hope that answered your question.
Other questions?
Hi, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate your last comment. I have learning disabilities, dyslexia, and dysgraphia. All through my childhood, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 16, and even then was unusual only because all of my parents were educators. Did they catch it? Because we're talking the mid-1970s here. Please don't do the math. But I felt the same way, and I was told the same thing over and over again. Doesn't try hard enough. Is lazy, and that's the same thing. Or have you tested her for MR? But I just got those comments over and over and over again, and it's something that stuck with me still. I'm still, just that feeling of inadequacy and indifference. It still pops up from time to time, and I have, I think, let me rephrase it. I know I have a successful career, and I had used assistive technology all the time. I used to use typewriters, now I use computers. For me, Microsoft is assistive technology. But that feeling that you identified, and the comments, the laziness, the not trying hard enough, it's still all over my brain. I can't get rid of it. So thank you for that.
No problem. And I'm sorry you've had that experience, because I know that can really they can have a huge impact on you, and it's really hard to unlearn. And I was pretty lucky that I was diagnosed early on, because I've had some of those comments from some family members, and they have stuck with me. But after we learned that I was on the spectrum, my mom especially, she would be okay, be nice to Alyssa. It's this is autism. It's not laziness. It's not that she's not trying hard enough. So.
Yes, I just wanted to compliment you on your wonderful fantasy series and drawings.
Thank you.
When I was working at the high school level, I had a sci-fi, fantasy, and anime club for all of my ASCII students. And so I had a general education teacher who I took with me, and I recruited him because he loved cosplay as much as I did. you know? And when we go to these great events, he was like, oh my gosh, Erica, it's amazing. It's like, you know, it is this entirely enhanced level of fantasy and cosplay and just creativity that so many people don't know about. And my students would spend hours talking about things, you know, we kind of just stand in the corner like, oh, that's great, you know, and they knew so many amazing things. So I think one of the great hidden communities for people who are, you know, diverse neurologically is sort of that sci-fi, fantasy, and anime world, because it is so accepting. So it was really nice to see that in your production.
Thank you for that. I do notice that there's like a lot of Aspies who are in like fandoms of like fantasy and sci-fi and stuff. Probably Steph over there, she loves anime, and I love anime. It's awesome, and it's just honestly one of my favorite things about talking to my friend Katie is hearing her talk about her stories. Now there are some times when like, because I can't take in tons of information in my brain all at once, sometimes my brain will start frying, but I'm like desperately trying to listen to her talking about it because it's so interesting. She has like so many different worlds, so many different characters, like really in-depth, really detailed. Just like Katie, you need to find somebody who can produce this into like a TV show or a comic series, because it would be just really epic. So I think that's so cool that there's so many Aspies who are really creative like that.
Other questions for Alyssa?
There's one over here.
Alyssa, wondering how much the full DVD is?
The DVDs are $15. You can get them online. There's a link on the paper, but if you want like a direct link to where you can get it, just put in your email address on a sheet of paper there. And if you check off, there's two little check boxes there to sign up for either my Asperger's blog or my film updates. If you sign up for my Asperger's blog, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a free DVD. So if you want to, you know, try and see if you could win that.
Did your counselors in high school help you pick a college? And then when you got to college, did you request the services?
Actually, when I was in high school, I was homeschooled again when I was in high school, because like my mom said in the film, you know, I was in high school for like a little bit, but then the staff, they didn't get me, and I wasn't thriving, I wasn't learning anything there. So I started being homeschooled. So it was mostly my mom that helped me pick out a college. We just looked at different colleges and we decided to go with what suited me best, which was, you know, small college, lots of nature around, you know, friendly people. And then of course there was, you know, the people who worked with, you know, students with disabilities. So it was mostly up until college, like my mom helped me with most of that stuff. Nowadays, I think if I were to go back to college, I would probably look into all that stuff myself.
Hi. So as a therapist, we do a lot of coping strategies in our clinic. So I wanted to know what you found, was most helpful for you when you don't have the luxury of like having a schedule planned out ahead of time. So things you work on to like practice, maybe if there is a change in your schedule that happens and you don't necessarily have control over it.
So just in general, or like since I'm not in college, or
in general.
Just in general.
Life goes, you know, one way.
Well, even when I don't have a schedule, I have a schedule. Like, I have a couple dry erase calendars because I don't like having, you know, paper calendars piling up. But I would draw with different colored like markers on the calendar, and I'd be like, okay, so this day is for going shopping, or like even if I'm not doing anything, like, you know, like going to this conference or something, or if I'm not going to work, I'll have something on my calendar, because if I have nothing, I do nothing, and then I feel awful because I do nothing. So I plan out my days like all the time, and I keep wishing I would have brought this with me, but I have a a little magnetic board, and this is something I put together because I couldn't find anything like this on the internet. I made these little magnets, and I put little pieces of paper on the magnets that would say something that I do very often. So like, lunch, or take a nap, or get ready for bed, or go get ready to leave the house or something. So I have tons of magnets that say things like that, and I'll like line them up in a certain order for that day. So even if my calendar has nothing on it, I'll still have that board, and so I can see what my day looks like, and that really helps with my anxiety, because just knowing what's going to happen really helps me.
I was just going to address her comment. As I said, our son has never been diagnosed, but change is hard. So we developed this concept of a plan. So plan A was we were going to go here to the barber. Well, that barber was closed. Okay, well, what's plan B? Well, and then it was a problem-solving tool, and we just worked over it over time. Worked on it. We had plan A, we'd have plan B, we'd have plan C, and eventually he was able to come up with the next plan. And finally one day we got down to J or K, and he goes, "Mom, the plan is just to go home." And I said, "That's good." And then the problem became the plans got in the way sometimes of learning. And so we had, I don't know how we did it, but somehow we transitioned that, yes, and I think it's exactly what you said, Alyssa, is that you always have something going on in the back of your brain, what do I do next? And it was just teaching problem-solving skills, it was teaching, you try to think ahead, you try to plan ahead, and it just gave him a concrete tool to work with.
I think that was an excellent idea, plan A, plan B, plan C.
Other questions?
Two little ones. First of all, thank you so much for coming. This was wonderful. And you're obviously a very gifted filmmaker. So I have one question, which is, do you have any plans for the next film you're going to make? And what have we missed by not seeing the longer version of Through Our Eyes?
Well, as of now, I'm really hoping that I can make another film about Asperger's or about autism, because there has been a lot of changes in the autism culture now, and I want to talk about more about what the autism community is doing nowadays versus how it was back when I made this film. I also have a lot of extra footage from the film that I never used, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to put the rest of that together, because there still is some valuable insights in that as well. And as for the longer version on the DVD, the difference between this version and that version, this version has 3 people, me, Katie, and Matt. But the longer version has 7 people on the autism spectrum, including the 3 of us. So there's a lot more, I guess, sort of diverse perspectives in there, and a lot more information in general. A lot of stuff that we talk about here is expanded on as well. So, I highly recommend checking it out for the film itself, as well as all the extra footage, because there's a lot of valuable insight from the parents and the professionals who work with people on the spectrum.
Okay. Alyssa, thank you.
Thanks for having me.